Duke Nukem 3D was the first game to come out in the holy build engine trinity, and it's the one I have the most nostalgia for. Even though I played Shadow Warrior and Blood when I was younger, I didn't get into them as much as Duke 3D, probably due to the spikes in difficulty between each game. I hold a ton of love for Duke 3D, and Duke Nukem is still one of my favourite video game characters. Before he turned into kind of a douche with Duke Nukem Forever, he was a badass. Duke 3D is not regarded as the best game on the build engine, as that honour always seems to go to Blood, for good reason by the way, but it is still one of my favourite video games of all time. 3D Realms were at the top of their game when they designed Duke 3D, and the interactivity and detail in the environments was on another level. Quake was released the same year as Duke 3D, and even though I'm a big fan of it, I don't think Quake holds a candle to Duke Nukem. The personality on display is leagues above Quake, and at the time, playing as a character who talks was really exciting. However, I don't think the interactivity and Duke's one-liners would have been as iconic if the gunplay and level design didn't hold up. Instead of taking place in hell or something, Duke 3D's levels are set in real-life locations, like cinemas, strip clubs, karaoke bars, and city banks. The only time that this game goes off the rails a bit with the level design is with the second episode, where each map is set in space. Lunar Apocalypse is the weakest point in Duke Nukem 3D for most people, but I don't think it's downright bad or anything. We are getting ahead of ourselves though, so let's start talking about LA Meltdown. Episode 1, Level 1, is arguably the greatest level in any first-person shooter. The map wraps around in a very slick way with the destructible walls, the movie theater setting is great, and this is the perfect introduction to Duke Nukem 3D. I love how you can navigate this level in multiple ways, and you could either get into the cinema by blowing out the front entrance or walking into the back exits. This is genius level design right here. In one of the secrets, you can get access to all of the first episode's weapons. This shotgun in Duke 3D is one of the best shotguns in video game history, and the dance you perform with the pig cops where you pop in, shoot, and pop out to avoid their hit scan attacks is so much fun. The Ripper Cannon is another good weapon, and it's a different take on the classic chain gun from 90s FPS games. The standard rocket launcher is present too in Duke 3D, as well as the pipe bombs and laser trip mines you get in the game. I don't really use the laser trip mines at all to be fair, but the pipe bombs are so enjoyable to throw up and detonate. The other guns you get in episode 2 include the Shrinker, the Devastator, and the Freeze Gun. The Shrinker is great for taking out mini battle lords, the Devastator is a perfect counter to the Octobrains, and the Freeze Gun is kind of the odd one out. It's more of a novelty than anything else, and I don't find many practical uses for it. In general though, Duke 3D's arsenal kicks so much ass. Back to episode 1's levels, I think they are extremely consistent. The Red Light District is probably the most infamous level in Duke 3D, but regardless of the pixelated tits, the map is still very well designed. One of the coolest aspects about episode 1 is how you get captured by the aliens and end up on death row in just the third level of the game. It's a great little turn of events, and level 3 is fantastic like the rest of them. I find parts of Duke 3D to be quite atmospheric, like the prison church turning all satanic when you hit the switch in Death Row, and also when you see the alien spaceship in the Abyss. The weakest link in episode 1 is probably Toxic Dump, and while it's not bad in the slightest, it's just not as fantastic as the rest of the episode's levels. That being said, episode 1 has the best secret level in the game, with Launch Facility, with it acting like a normal map instead of a gimmicky experiment. The rest of the secret levels, with the exception of Freeway, might as well have been designed by Sandy Peterson because they are way too experimental. I don't really recommend playing them, but at least a launch facility and freeway are absolute gems. Anyway, episode 1 ends on a strong note with the Abyss. The San Andreas Fault reference is awesome, the transition from the rocky terrain to the eerie alien architecture is iconic, and the level starts right as Toxic Dump ends, with Duke going down a sewer system. Everyone agrees that LA Meltdown is a masterpiece, but players are very mixed on episode 2's set of levels. Instead of continuing on from episode 1 and having more levels located on Earth, episode 2 is set entirely in outer space. I don't mind the change of scenery at all, and in fact, I think Lunar Apocalypse has probably the best pop culture references in the game. I mean, the 2001 monolith showing up in Darkside is worth the price of admission alone. However, episode 2 eventually runs out of steam, and the space backdrop kinda makes all the levels blend together after a while. I do like the more bleak tone that Lunar Apocalypse was trying to go for, and there are some standout moments in this episode, but it goes on for a bit too long. Also, the secret levels in episode 2 are rather gimmicky and they just don't do it for me. Spin Cycle is a nauseating mess and it's downright not fun. Lunatic Fringe features a fake revolving staircase because the build engine can't actually pull off multi-leveled rooms, but there's nothing else to this level. Again, I prefer maps like Launch Facility because they still act like normal levels, but they are obviously hidden behind secret exits instead. Shit like Spin Cycle from episode 2 makes my head hurt, and the novelty wears off quickly, especially because we're not in 1996 anymore. That being said, Lunar Apocalypse gets way too much hate I reckon, and while it may be the weakest episode in the game, the levels aren't that bad. Spaceport is a solid introduction to the episode, and reveals the Enforcer and Sentry drones quite well. Incubator starts out in a normal space station, but then the Protozoid eggs and the alien fauna slowly seeps into the level, which is a cool touch. Warp factor is fine, but even with the Star Trek references, this level doesn't really do much to stick out. Fusion Station is severely underrated, and it fully leans into the alien architecture. I mean, sure, you could just use the jetpack and fly to the end of the level, but I still think this is a good level regardless. There's a good variety of gameplay moments in Fusion Station, as you'll be crawling through small spaces, swimming under the water, blowing up reactors, and of course, shooting bad guys. This is a small level as well, so the fact that they crammed all of these activities into Fusion Station without it being too jarring is a good thing. Occupied Territory, on the other hand, is just too generic. There are a couple of moments in the level with multiple battle lords, and it bogs down the experience. Also, the fact that you can access Spin Cycle from this level should mark it down just on principle. With that in mind, the second half of Lunar Apocalypse pulls it together, since Tiberius Station, Lunar Reactor, and Darkside are all quality maps. I think if this episode cut out 1 or 2 levels, the overall product would have been much better for it. Episode 2 just suffers from too many levels, and not enough variety to warrant the increased amount of stages. Duke 3D at least brings it home, all the way, both figuratively and literally, with the third episode, Shrapnel City. These bunch of city levels are fucking awesome, and for those who hate Lunar Apocalypse, Episode 3 more than makes up for it. Raw Meat, Bankroll, LA Rumble, Movie Set, Rapid Transit, Fahrenheit, Hotel Hell, Freeway, Stadium, even Flood Zone are all solid levels. Flood Zone isn't a terrible map or anything, but traversing it is kind of a pain in the ass due to the excessive amount of water. Apart from, I don't know, teardrops, every single other level in Shrapnel City is in the A grade range. Some are A-, some are straight A's, and others are A+. The level design featured in episode 3 is wonderful, and it does rival LA Meltdown in terms of quality. Duke Nukem 3D is one of the best FPS games ever made, and its legacy has been honoured with several re-releases and expansions. The Atomic Edition was put out shortly after, and the 4th episode has been included in every release since. In 2016, the World Tour edition of Duke 3D was produced by Gearbox, and that also featured a brand new episode made by the original game designers. That being said, I don't think anything can compete with the 3 initial episodes, specifically with LA Meltdown and Shrapnel City. Even though the Duke Nukem franchise has been mostly forgotten about and will probably never see another Duke game again, at least we still have Duke 3D. I know that Blood is the most acclaimed build engine game, and while it very well could be the best game made with that engine, Duke will always have a special place with me. Duke 3D has a ton of personality and charm, but that is backed up by solid game design, and that distinguishes it from other games of its era. For example, the Roddy Piper quote works in Raw Meat because 1, it's fucking entertaining, and 2, the quote is packaged with fantastic combat and level structure. Duke is one of those characters that borrows from these old school action movies heavily, but I think what makes him so cool in Duke 3D is the environment around him. While he spouts off one-liners and takes steroids, the environments we see in the game are quite grimy, seedy, and realistic in heavy quotes. There are rats scurrying across the street, there are cracks in the walls, the lighting can be quite moody at points, and that all contrasts with Duke saying these ridiculous action movie lines. This is where Duke Nukem Forever fucked up, I believe, and while I don't want to complain about that game too much here, one of the reasons why it inherently falls flat is because the world around Duke was already ridiculous. Sure, there are comedic posters and monitors in Duke 3D, but that's where it ends. In Duke Nukem Forever, the world itself is a parody, and that's not really what Duke 3D was, besides the occasional Easter eggs and all. Oh, and also Duke Nukem Forever was terribly designed and has subpar combat mechanics, but that's neither here nor there. Even if we don't get another Duke Nukem game again, at least we have Duke Nukem 3D, as it remains one of my favourite games of all time.